There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Bill from Nairobi is back. Hello, Bill.
Hi, guys.
We're going to be talking about a lesbian novel that I didn't know was a lesbian novel. In fact,
It is.
based on the title, I didn't even know if it was fiction. Everyone in this room will someday be dead by Emily Austen.
Yes.
You loved it.
I loved it. I loved it so much. I read it twice.
That is fantastic. So tell us what it's about and then tell us why.
Oh, okay. So it follows the story of a late 20s young woman called Gilda. And Gilda, at the beginning of the book, is involved in a car crash, like not something dangerous. And she's narrating this experience where blood is coming out, her hand is sort of facing the other way. And the voice of the narrator, because I listened to it on audio, is it's very deadpan, like she doesn't care. And you later realize that she's suffering from crippling anxiety and depression. Like she doesn't take care of herself and she just lets people push her around. She's not grounded in reality in a sense. And throughout the whole book, you feel that grow into this ball, like a small snowball. It rolls and it becomes an avalanche. Wow. So at the beginning of the book, you realize she's not well because she goes to the hospital and the hospital's like, "Oh, Gilda, you're back. Is everything okay?" Because she has panic attacks and she comes to the hospital and she's like, I can't breathe. And the doctor is like, "Have you tried this medication?" And when she tries the medication, it just escalates. She never feels comfortable in her body. And this trickles down in her relationship with another woman, her online relationship. She gets a job in a church where she was going for she thought it was like a free therapy session. Yeah. She walks in, she finds it's an interview for a receptionist at a Catholic church. And she's exposed, she has this fear that God or the priest or someone in church will find out she's a lesbian and an atheist. And the humor, any humor in book is subjective, but the humor in this one is so well done for me. I kept laughing throughout because when she was a kid, she flashes back towards like her childhood. She found out the word atheist, like one person called her an atheist, and she used it as a insult. So when her mom told her to like go up, she's like, "I live with such atheists." Atheist evil. And even when she's in church and Catholic church have this routine of waking up, kneeling, she gets shocked at this idea, like, what is happening? Like if she doesn't conform to this routine, they will find out she's a lesbian. But there's so much more to that because it's about her mental state and how one thing leads to another. And before you know it, you're trapped yourself into a hole and you can't move.
So the comedy is not jarring up against the more serious aspects of the novel, that it all flows together well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was a nice balance. And it's general. I've seen it categorized as general fiction. But yeah, because it's easy to consume. I think this is a book anyone can read. The prose it's funny. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of internal, but the self-deprecation is hidden under the humors. When I was reading, I felt sorry for her, I empathized with her even more because you realize that she has been suffering throughout her whole life, trying to connect with her body. She doesn't feel like she is this person.
Is it first-person narrative?
Yes.
So it's her own humor. So it's not some external narrator.
External. She's so character. Right. She's in your face, or she tries not to be in your face, where she makes these very messy decisions, and you're like, "Gilda, just stop doing that. Stop doing that." But you realize it's out of her hand, regardless of whether it's in control, because you can only do so much, one person. And she's let people walk all over her, and she's hiding. And throughout the whole book, you find out parts of herself through her childhood that really formed who she is as a person. Sexuality, the way she interacts with her work.
You really loved the protagonist.
Yeah. I
Gilda.
think she was endearing. Yeah, she was endearing. She was funny. At some point, you can relate to her in some very, very weird way, because I could see some bits of myself in people pleasing, just not being in control of your narrative and giving power to other people. You get what I mean? Yeah.
And I don't think we need to say too much more about the plot, but I understand that she begins impersonating one of her online older friends.
Yes.
And I don't think we need to say too much more about that, but there is that. So the story takes a weird turn there, but that it sounds like, even though the plot might be at certain points zany, it's more of a character-driven novel, would you say?
Yeah, it's a very character-driven novel, because you don't get any other perspective. It's solely her. I went through this period where I was reading about white women losing their shit.
Losing their shit.
Entered Virginia, not the one, Mrs. What's it, not Virginia Woolf, the one where the woman. It's a recent book about a protagonist whose husband wrote a book about a prostitute. Then people think the book is about her. It's a very interesting book.
Oh, I don't know if I know that one.
So I read it with this one, and the characters have a similar feel. But Gilda is more millennial. Like she just lets life roll around. She's not serious, and you realize she has to take control of her life, and it's infuriating. I think that's what will get people mad. It's the self-deprecation and the decisions that she makes. Like, anyone can read this book. You should just try out the first chapter. I'd recommend the audiobook, because the audiobook is
good,
stellar.
Oh my goodness, the author is Canadian. I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I did. I can't believe that. Is this a debut novel?
It is.
I can't believe this is a debut novel.
She was born in St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sold.
Lots of great Canadian authors.
Yeah. Well, I'm sold. I wasn't even sure from the title. Is it nonfiction or what?
It's not. It's a fiction, and it's very quick. I think you can read it. It flies. The pacing is so well done.
And based on your description of the novel, I now have a much stronger sense of
understanding. Yeah,
a much stronger sense of the tone of the title.
Yeah, it's
everyone in this room will someday get. So
yeah.
Well, Bill, thank you again.
Awesome.
Sarah Hope from the Santa Cruz area of California is back. Sarah Hope, thank you for coming back.
I'm glad to be here. I'm always glad to be here.
And what a fascinating novel this is. It's called The Stone World, and we have found about 700 different pronunciations of this very famous surname in the world of American letters and literature. Joel Agee or Agee, which one did you grow up knowing? The author, Joel, is the son of the famous writer James.
I grew up thinking it was Agee, but now that we've been listening to different computer voices pronounce it, I'm thinking perhaps Agee.
Agee. So shall you go with whatever? And I in my head, I think that's how I've pronounced it in my head, but I don't know if I've ever heard anybody before I talk to you about it pronounce it out loud. So
I think as long as we're enthusiastic about the book, I don't think he's going to hold it against us if he hears this and we say it wrong.
We should have found an interview with him. So if I can find that after the fact, I will put a little comment in. It gives me great pleasure to confirm that the author himself pronounces his own name as follows: Joel Agee. The father, this is by the son of the acclaimed writer James, and it's an autobiographical novel about growing up with his mother in Mexico after his parents split up. It just came out at the end of February. Tell us about it. It sounds absolutely incredible.
Oh, it's a marvelous book. I want to start by saying that the narrator is a 6-year-old boy living in Mexico with his mother and her second husband, who he really sees as a second father. And he's 6 years old, but he is treated in this very respectful way by his parents. And he's very clearly sort of, even at this age, building his personal sense of ethics. And when he has conundrums, they take them seriously. But the mother's second husband is a refugee from Nazi Germany. He's Jewish. The boy's mother is also Jewish. So technically he is, although none of them are practicing. And he's also a communist. So he had to get out of Germany at the start.
A whole bunch of very important reasons.
Yes. And there's a whole expat community there. Plus, there's a little guest appearance by Frida Kahlo, who's one of the dinner guests at one point. And it's done fine. It's not like an irritating movie cameo. So it's this very complicated, very political, always trying to figure out how to make ends meet expat community in Mexico. And this 6-year-old boy who is just incredibly thoughtful, but also he's genuinely 6 years old. This is not, some adult coming back and putting his adult thinking into his child's self. I don't know how much of it is autobiographical. Some of it must be very much so, but
I certainly can say from the 2 minutes of research I did that the German stepfather is based on a famous communist writer from Germany. Yep. Mm-hmm. That was her second. When
they left Mexico, the real Agees, when the three of them left Mexico, they moved back to the German Democratic Republic, to East Germany, because he was a communist and he actually played a role in the literary scene there. I think he edited a magazine and among other things.
And that German novelist's real name is Bodo Use, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right.
I'm going to give an example of kind of the two levels of thinking that are going on in this boy's mind. Is he knows the word party has two meanings. There's a party where you go and you're festive with people, but he knows the grown-ups always talk about the party, which is apparently very serious and very contentious, but it never involves an actual party. The title comes from his habit of sinking into himself, into his thoughts. And in particular, he has a favorite blue marble, and he sometimes likes to lie on the patio in his family's yard with his ear pressed up against the tiles. And he's got this favorite marble clutched in his hand. And he can get to the point where he feels that he's sunk down into the earth and is listening to the earth and the roots down there. And he likes to spend time there when he can get himself to that state. So that's, I think the stone world is the world he enters through the patio.
Wow. This one really intrigues me. I'm not sure. I'm really looking forward to giving it a try because I sometimes struggle with child narrators, but the way you're describing the way that point of view and the childhood confusion or trying to suss out from the perspective of a 6-year-old what these two different meanings of party are, that's really intriguing to me.
He reads as a real 6-year-old to me, as intelligent and thoughtful, but not as precocious.
Okay. And Joel Agee has written memoir before too that have been quite well received. The one about his boyhood in East Germany the post Mexico era, and then in 2004, In the House of My Fear, which I don't know what that's about, and in fact it's described as a memoir. And now he's written in novels. Do you have any comment on, knowing how autobiographical this is, what makes it a great novel as opposed to, does it read like a memoir?
Well, first off, if it were a memoir, I think it would be his adult voice. Yeah. And I think that many things about this child, his name's Peter, that winds up getting pronounced Peta in sort of the Spanish transliteration. If he were writing a memoir trying to do that voice, it would sound really, really artificial. And it would have to be one of those things of, I think back to the childhood me who wondered, and it would be atrocious. But with the boy actually doing this, it works well. And it gives him a chance at the same time to fill things out a little bit more. He's still seeing the world from Peter's perspective, but he also can put in a little bit about what the grown-ups are doing and things without getting too technical. So people feel like they're in the home with him.
So a memoirist has made a very successful transition into a
Beautiful.
debut novelist, in your opinion. So
it's really, really lovely.
In your review, you said it's not driven by any overarching narrative.
Yeah. And I usually like a narrative, but this is one of several books that's impressed me lately with it's driven by thought almost more than anything else, but it is not abstruse in the least.
The book sounds really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
What a delight it is to welcome a brand new guest to Bite Size Book Chats. This is Lynnie from Ipswich in England. Lynnie, hello.
Hello, Sean, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, how lovely to have you here. And you are my literary soulmate because you read a lot of the same stuff that I'm interested in, and that's why I've invited you on. And as Lynnie and I were talking offline, we have never known each other, but we're Goodreads friends, which just means we follow what each other is reading. But a lot of readers who read middlebrow or women's fiction in the first half of the 20th century aren't necessarily comfortable coming online. So brave Lynnie, thank you again.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about one of the books that's recently been reprinted, I guess September of last year, in the British Library Women's Writers Series. And this is originally from 1915, Sally on the Rocks by Winifred Boggs. You loved it. Tell us why. Tell us about the book.
Right. So here is the book.
Yeah. It's a gorgeous cover.
It is a gorgeous cover, and it did appeal to me to pick that one first out of that series. I picked it because it's set in a village, and it's basically about two women who are after security, and there's a banker in the village who earns £1,500 a year, and they've set their eyes on him, but it's going to be like which one will get the man in the end. But one of the women already lived in the village. The other one, who is Sally, was in Paris, and she had a letter from a spinster in the village called Miss Maggie, who wrote to her to let her know about this man that was, quite rich. Well, yeah, 1,500 in 1915 is a lot of money. But I'm not quite sure about Miss Maggie's intentions, whether she was helping or whether it was for her own entertainment to have these two women, against each other.
She's that kind of village spinster, is she?
She's that kind of village spinster. So I thought at first it was just going to be about these two women and their ways they were going to entice this man, who also interestingly had a book left to him by his dead mother, which was advising him on who not to marry. Mustn't marry a woman who's got her own opinions, mustn't marry a woman who's already been married, and all that kind of things.
Sounds like quite a dated advice book.
Yes, I think so. But also a rather sort of fussy book as well,
Absolutely. So who is Sally's rival for this man's affections?
Her name is Mrs. Dalton. She's a widow and she has a child.
She's got one strike against her already from the advice book.
Yes, she has. But also Sally has, because Sally has her own opinions. And so who is it going to be? I think the interesting thing was that it didn't focus all the time on the two women. There were other characters, all very well written. You knew about the vicar, you knew about the spinster, you knew about the banker, Sally, the widow, and my favourite character was Old John.
Who's Old John?
Old John actually is a dog owned by the vicar. And Sally is the vicar's ward, so she came back from Paris to live with him. Old John was not best pleased because he disliked females monopolising his master. Felt they didn't understand dogs and were trouble. And there was a great little sentence which I'd like to read out. Sure. Old John, staring at his master, said, "They said they would take you for a nice long walk, and then their silly legs would give way before you were well started. And I just thought, he's a misogynist dog.
Would you say this is more of a character-driven novel or a plot-centered novel? 50-50.
I think it was a 50-50, yeah. I mean, the plot moved on. There was lots of things happening, a lot of confusion with... There was a lot of... it's a very moral book as well, about the difference between what women and what men could do. Past lives, stained characters. It was, what was acceptable.
Several of the reviews I have looked at say that it's deceptively simple because it does actually tackle some very serious themes or issues.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. Money was I think the draw of money was a huge thing because if you wanted security, and women did want security because they couldn't work, there were few men because of the war. Interestingly enough, it was written during the war.
Yes.
First of all, it was a thing to have that security. Sally reminded me a lot of a character in another book I read called Miss Mole by E.H. Young.
Yes.
In that both women were down on their luck, had to take other people's charity, maybe sacrificing their own happiness. But I don't know, because of the way they were, I don't want to reveal too much, but... No,
you're tantalizing us by not veering into spoiler territory.
Okay.
And so the setting is during World War I, or is it set kind of before the war?
I think it's set during the war because they do mention soldiers on leave.
And little is known about the author, Winifred Boggs. When I search on Google for her, everything that comes up is a reference to this novel rather than... She doesn't have a Wikipedia page, so she's a bit elusive.
Yeah, I've not heard of her at all.
She was born in 1882 is all that I managed to find.
Oh, okay.
So this would have come out when she was about in her 30s, maybe mid to late 30s, if that math is correct. How would you describe the tone? Is it comedic as well as serious?
Yes, it is humorous, especially talking about the banker and his fussy ways.
Are you a Barbara Pym fan?
Now, I think I would be. I have not read any Barbara Pym, and
well,
I'm always being recommended.
Yes, you must at some point when the time is right. Hearing you talk about this novel, it sounds vaguely Pymian, but of course it's decades before she began publishing.
Yeah.
She was only 2 years old when this was published. But the other interesting thing is the name of the village is Old Crampton. Crampton?
Yeah, Little Crampton, yes.
Barbara Pym, her middle name was Crampton, and she wrote a novel called Crampton Hodnett. And the name Crampton, I believe, was her paternal grandmother's maiden name. But I may have that wrong, but it was a family surname. And she used it in her fiction, and it was her middle name. And so I just wonder if it somehow might all tie together.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It's not a very common thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a good. Yeah, you're making me want to read Barbara Pym.
Very good. So, Lynnie, thank you so much for telling us about the book. I hope that you'll come back and tell us about another book.
Yeah, I'd love to, Sean. Thank you so much.
This is very exciting to meet one of my subscribers for the first time. And we used to live thousands of miles from each other, and now we only live a few hundred. This is Louise from Edmonton, Alberta. Louise, hello.
Hey, Sean, how are you?
Great. It's so nice to meet you. You've been one of my subscribers for a few years, and you leave wonderfully sassy comments, and now we meet. And who's your friend?
This is Bentley. He's not a reader, but he doesn't read with his eyes. He reads by osmosis when I read.
And we're here to talk about a fairly recent 2021 historical novel about a woman who was instrumental in the War of the Roses. The novel is called Cecily, and the author is Annie Garthwaite. Tell us about this book, Louise.
Well, this is Cecily right here. So I'm dressed to match.
You are. I approve. I am too, actually.
Yes, you are. It's billed sort of as a feminist retelling of the War of the Roses. So it's the story from the 1400s told from a woman's perspective. Because usually when you get history. It's wars and battles and politics and men. And this is a woman's perspective. A woman who was very instrumental in it. She was the Duchess of York. She was married to the Duke of York, who was the one, well, one of the ones who had a claim to the throne.
And her name was Cecily.
Her name was Cecily Neville.
And this is her story as imagined by the author.
Yes, who did a lot of research on it. So there are actual historical points throughout the book.
Right. How does the story open?
Oh, it's got quite a vivid opening. It opens, Cecily is 16. So she and Richard, her husband, were married when she was 8. And at 16, I think he's 5 years older. He was 5 years older than. So it starts when she's 16. They've just started living together as husband and wife. And it starts on May 30th, 1431, where they're witnessing the burning of Joan of Arc.
I'm just going to stop you to clarify. So they were married when she was 8, but they didn't start cohabiting until she was 16?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
She stayed with her family.
He lived with her family too. It was an arranged marriage, of course. And
well, I won't say that makes it all okay then, but that's interesting. All right, please continue.
So it starts with the burning of Joan of Arc. So that opening chapter, I was not sure I'd be able to make it through the book because it's pretty gruesome. It's not graphic, but it's pretty gruesome because she's talking about a woman burning at the stake and flesh burning and melting and screaming, and thousands of people watching this happen and thinking it's, probably some thinking it's great and some thinking it's horrible.
Great entertainment.
She's seeing it from a perspective of, she's only 3 years younger than Joan of Arc. And this is what happens when people go against the rules. And that sort of is a jumping off point because that's what Cecily did. She went against the rules.
I gather from reading your review and other reviews that the rest of the novel isn't a lot of blood and gore. Is that right?
That's right.
We get this at the beginning, and then what kind of a story is it from there on?
From there on, it's Cecily's life as they travel around because they lived in France for a while, they lived in Ireland for a while, I think they lived in Scotland for a while. So they move around a lot, and it's her life, what they're doing, what they want to do, and their plans eventually for fighting for the throne. There's a lot of her childbirth because she gave birth 12 times, but only 7 of the children lived past infancy. So there was a lot of that. The very first one, especially, there's a lot of emphasis on talking about what it was like for women to give birth at that time, having to be off in a separate room somewhere else.
So there is a focus on a lot of the kind of everyday events in the life of a woman of this age, but she was one of the key figures in the War of the Roses, and this was a very dramatic time to be in England. So how is that all balanced out between her raising a family and what's going on around her and all the plots and all that stuff?
Well, interestingly, after they're born, the kids generally don't play a whole lot of, they're not a big role in the book until they get a bit older, a few years later. Mostly it's, she gives birth to them and there's a name, and then she just carries on with what she and Richard are doing to, about the king and the other parts of her family that they're either fighting with or they're on side with. It's sort of like a chess game.
I've forgotten more than I probably ever knew about the War of the Roses. If I asked you to give us a capsule summary about the War of the Roses, could you do that?
There are 2 families, both Plantagenets, the Yorks and the Lancasters. And the Yorks were the White Rose, and the Lancasters were the Red Rose. And they were fighting because the Yorks definitely thought the current king at the time, Henry or Edward the whatever, 3rd or 4th or whichever he was. So the Yorks thought that the king was very weak, and he was being ruled by his wife and another man who I don't remember how he was related to the wife, but they thought the king was being sort of ruled by them. And he did apparently seem to have episodes of severe mental illness where he was basically incapacitated. So somebody else was ruling, and they thought that they needed a stronger king than that. So they fought to get Richard to be the king, because he, from two sides, he was actually in line for the throne.
Her husband.
Yes, the Duke of York.
And I don't think it'll be a spoiler to say was he, because this is history that anybody can Google, but did he become king?
No, he did not. But two of their sons did.
Two of their sons did. And then does it get into that part where I think Cecily was she not plotting against some of her sons at certain times during all of that?
It ends, the War of the Roses was 40 years long, and this is just 20 years of that. So at the end of it, her oldest son is still a teenager, and he was one of the kings. So
how would you describe Cecily's character?
I think I described her in my Goodreads review as she's a woman we need now.
You did. So say more about that, please.
She was very strong. She was very willing to stand up and say what needed to be done. She was willing to fight for it. She didn't back down just because it was a man telling her no. She was very strategic. She was very strong. And she really went for what she wanted. And I thought, this is a woman who should be a politician or something now. We could use somebody like her now. Because she could lead. She probably could have been queen and been great.
So tell us why you love this book so much.
I didn't think I really liked retellings. I've read a few other retellings that I ended up hate reading. But this one, I heard about this one and I thought, I didn't know a whole lot about the War of the Roses. I thought, from a woman's perspective, for me, is always more interesting because there's been so much history. Told from a men's perspective, I thought it'd be interesting to find out what it would be like from a woman's perspective. And the writing is just so good. It's history, but it read like a thriller for me. Like I raced through it because I like, what's going to happen next? Even though you know what's going to happen next, it was still read like.
If it reads like a thriller, it's fast-paced and there's a lot of dramatic incident, right?
Yes.
It also doesn't ignore her day-to-day life as a mother and all that, but it's really quite a sweeping historical thriller from a perspective of a woman important in the tale.
Yes, very important in the tale. And it's only the first, I think she's 40 at the end and she lived to be 80. So she's got another 40 years of fascination to go.
There may be a sequel.
Well, I did ask.
Oh.
And the authors did say she's working on another book in the same time frame. So I don't know if it will be about Cecily or not, but there is another one.
I would just like to close with a couple of sentences from the author's bio that she herself wrote. So it's not a bio, but an artist profile on Goodreads. She said, "What can I say? I love 15th century history. No apologies, no excuses. The 100 Years' War, the Wars of the Roses, all of that. It's not that I'm a big fan of blood and battles. Personally, I can do without that sort of thing. No, it's the women who interest me. How they negotiated their way in the world, how they managed, some of them at least, probably more than you'd think, to wield power and influence at a time when men seem to hold most of the cards." And that is a good perspective on what she has produced. So I believe this is her debut.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And if that's what she's thinking, then Cecily was a hell of a card player.
That's right. Hell of a card player. There you go. Now, this book is currently not available in North America, so you went to some lengths to get it.
I did. And it turns out, I ordered it from Book Depository, and it turned out to be signed.
Oh.
So that was even more exciting.
Well, I assume it's going to be published in North America at some point, but in the meantime, it's probably available as a Kindle ebook or on Scribd or something, other ways to get at it. But there are overseas booksellers, and if people want to avoid anything connected to Amazon, probably Blackwell's has it in stock. They ship worldwide, free shipping. Well, I certainly am going to follow up with this. Louise, thanks for telling us about it. Will you come back?
I certainly will, Sean.